You listed in your bulletin, your Federal Theater Bulletin, which I received, that had not been produced on the Federal Theater were an eye-opener for me. We knew that there were things that were planned, that plays that were planned that never got done because the project was cut off so suddenly. And it was impossible to work with limited personnel. I just think that that would be an area that a theater dedicated just to taking these unproduced works of the 30s and see what richness is in them. They may be lousy plays. I don't know. They may all be terrible. I doubt it. I think that they probably be stimulating. I know I have a play home in New York about Arthur Miller, about the housing crisis, a one-act play. I had to remind Arthur Miller when we did Death of a Salesman together, later on a revival of Death of a Salesman, that I had a play of his that he had written during those days with the left-wing theater about the housing crisis. He didn't even remember it. And so that there were, I'm sure, a tremendous amount of creative talent that had not been used, especially in the writing areas. So I would think that it would be an enormously important thing for the university, perhaps to do that as one of the side projects.
We agree, and we're working on that right now, by the way,
that's
on Lily newspapers.
Now, go ahead. Well, you want to ask me some more questions?
Yes. Going back a little bit to your works for the Federal Theater and the Children's Unit, could you tell me if there was a certain technique that you used in putting plays before children that you wouldn't normally have used in for adults?
Yes, I think so. I think that the whole use of audience participation, which I think came out of, again, out of the left-wing approach to theater. It came out of those people who are interested in the Moscow Art Theater and Stanislavski and in the stylized theater, the Vakhtangov, and the use of the Red Army theater, of the expanding the horizon of theater, which something which happened right after the Russian Revolution, which probably was what upset Congressman Lambertson, that somehow actors were working in the audience. They were part of the audience, you see, and they were doing these strange things, and they heard probably it had to do with what the Reds were doing in Moscow. But basically, those actors who went on the project with all the stimulating ideas that came out of the group theater at that time and came out of the expanding political theater of the theater union, who ended up on the project, people who ended up on the project bringing their ideas with them. In the children's theater, certainly, we were affected by the communicating with the audience. That the children are not just watching Jack and the Beanstalk, but to get them involved. So that when you did Emperor's New Clothes, Czar and Zan, played by Julie Dass and Sam Bennell, found out when they played ball in the audience, threw a ball from one aisle to another, and then the kids threw the ball to them. They got the kids all involved, and then when the ball fell accidentally on stage, and one of them went up on the stage and looked under the curtain and called the other one over to see what he found under the curtain, and the curtain suddenly rose. The kids were really right there, so that when the sign said to the Emperor's palace, and the other one said to something else, and they would go to the wrong place. The kids would yell, no, it's the other, go. And then finally, they decided, as we began to develop, to ask the kids to come on the stage. See, originally the script had them going in another direction, and it didn't work. The kids refused to accept it, because the kids would yell and say, no, it's the other way, and if the actors who had been playing ball with them didn't go the way they said, then it was all a lie, and we lost the audience. A couple of times they wouldn't participate. Kids didn't participate, so the whole play lost its focus point of communicating with children. Then we had to change the script. The script was changed so that when finally Czar and Zan wanted to go the wrong way, and the kids told them, no, you got to go that way, and they did go that way, got tremendous hand, and then the audience was involved in all of their adventures, because they were in the audience with them. But many times the kids would come on the stage, you see, to point out what direction, because they'd say, wait, I can't understand. And so the theater, which was formerly such a formidable obstacle of communicating over footlights, or over the stage lights, or over the orchestra pit with children, because we built ramps that led onto the stage, the children became part of the show, and so that we learned the technique of how to get them involved.
Did you have to talk down to them?
No, never talked down. We found out just the opposite. That the moment you talked down, that they turned off. That when they were treated on the level that we expected them to be treated, that they helped our fantasy. And when they saw the emperor and he thought he was wearing new clothes and he was wearing his underwear, that was a tremendous moment when the kids pointed out that the emperor had no clothes on. The kids are part of Tsar and Zan.
That must have been a tremendous production, The Emperor's New
That
Clothes.
was one of the most elaborate productions. See, that was what you could do under federal theater, with federal money, not worried about the business, not worried about whether you're going to make a profit. This is which will lead us to the next question of how do you compare Medicine Show, which was a living newspaper, and the other living newspapers. How do you create, and how can you think in terms of creation when all you're thinking about is box office and will we have enough money to do the next production? You could do an elaborate children's theater play, as we did with sets and wonderful costumes, because you had your own wardrobe department, you had your own costumes. Everybody was working together in a collective, and the creativity could pass from one artist to another. So the costume designers, knowing the actors and knowing what they could do, could design around them, and they had their own workshop, and they worked with other workshops, and so it was all very, very exciting. And I think that the caliber of the plays were much higher than the plays that are done today, because the plays that are done today for children are very creative, many of them, but they also are limited by budget and how much money you can pay the actors and what can you pay for the costs of lights and so forth and so on. Now, for example, Medicine Show was a successful show. It really got nice notices. It lasted 9 weeks.
9 weeks,
because
that's not a very good
we had 40 actors in it, and 40 actors getting only $40 a week, which that was the stage minimum.
$1,600.
And you had stars like Dorothy McGuire, who had been a star, doing it for $40 a week, and you had Alfred Ryder and Olive Deering and Bill Hansen, all distinguished actors working for $40 a week, and Julie Dassin, his first directing show, and of course Martin Gable
he produced
was a producer and one of the stars of the show. With all of that, we used the technique that we learned in children's theater. And Julie had the actors in the audience. We had about 6 of us in the audience, including Dorothy McGuire, myself, and others. And used the voice technique of the loudspeaker. We gained all of those things, but basically added to it audience participation by having actors in the audience, so that we always had a seat reserved for us. And for example, in my case, when Martin Gable talked about hospitals and the fact that there aren't enough hospitals, enough beds, and about all of the things that are wrong with medicine, and said he'd like to have some volunteers from the audience to come up on stage and penetrate further into this world of medicine. I got up and started to leave. And he said, "We'd like to have you, sir." And I said, no, listen, I was up the aisle. I said, no, I said, I thought this was a movie. A friend of mine gave me a free ticket. I thought it was a movie. I didn't know it was going to be a stage play. I don't know anything about this thing. He said, "Come on, Mac. What's your name?" I said, "My name is Mac. I'm a steamfitter. What the hell do I know about this stuff?" And he said, "No, come on, and come and join the rest of us." And finally, I unwillingly go up there and say, "All right, I'll do it if you want me to, just for the hell of it," see. And Dorothy McGuire was a school teacher who happened to be sitting there, and he heard of some people volunteered, others were co-opted like me. One day, there was an old Jewish guy sitting next to me with a long beard, it looked like a rabbi. And when I got up and started to go out, he told me that he kept saying, no, go, it's be fun. And I said, no, suddenly you found yourself ad-libbing and improvising, and able to do that wonderful creative thing that you ordinarily would never do in the legitimate theater. And I went up the aisle, and I finally was convinced, and I started to go down. He followed me. he decided that after he tried to talk me into say he went on stage with me. It's the first, and didn't know what to do with him because we had a script and everything. So finally, one of the ushers came down and I had to whisper to him that
You're part of
that it's only a show. So he was very embarrassed.
Oh, gosh.
So that was part of the, but now that was an awfully exciting production. And for Julie, it was his break. After that, he went to Hollywood. It was, for me, my first professional show. I was able to join Actors Equity as a result of that, and it became my start in theater.
Do you think if it, talking about the play itself, and I have another question after this one, but there's one scene in there, the Alice in Wonderland scene, where, you remember that scene. We think that's a very effective scene in the play, but apparently there wasn't a tremendous reaction to it in the audience. There wasn't the response to it. You remember that? Why do you think it wasn't?
I don't really remember it too vividly, because all I remember is that we were trying a new technique. We were reaching an audience, many of them who had not seen Living Newspaper, don't forget. The Living Newspaper was always available to people of a lower income bracket, and then it, of course, attracted everybody, but we were also trying to attract the Broadway crowd. And there's an example where the price of tickets had to go up and where you had to have an enormous success in order to keep going. I don't remember anything about it, the Alice in Wonderland thing or anything. Remember, it's an experience. People who tell you after the fact how they felt and give you wise opinions about their experiences in specific, either are geniuses or they're charlatans. I don't pretend that I was that kind of an intellectual or that kind of a deep, wise person. I am basically an activist. I'm basically one who loves to be involved in any kind of activity, though I do read a great deal and study and so forth and so on. I don't like people who are give me long, deep analyses of what they did long after they did them, and at the time they did them, they didn't think like that at all. It was only afterwards that they analyzed it. So I can't remember it, you see.
Okay.
And you would remember it better than I would, because unless I had the script in front of me, reread it, and then all of the storage house of my brain cells would begin to work. Like talking with you, I thought of names that I haven't thought about for years.
Do you think that when it was done commercially, Medicine Show, do you think that production, given all the money situation of putting it on, do you think it would have been better?
Been done better?
Yes, in the Federal Theater, or?
No, I think that they did it with all of the integrity, with the greatest amount of integrity that I have ever seen on Broadway stage. Collie Wharton, who was a producer, was a wealthy woman who was a liberal. Her husband, John Wharton, was another liberal man, very progressive people. Martin Gable had a background in the Mercury Theater. I didn't know very much about him, but he was co-producing. He was married to Arlene Francis, and I think he had money. But they really tried to do an honest job, and the whole atmosphere around the production was to do the most you could in the 4 weeks of rehearsal. And for us to do what on the Federal Theater took 6 months and 8 months to do, I think that they spent an enormous amount of money and time to try and do, under Broadway conditions, what was practically impossible.
So it was really successful.
It was an elaborate production, and it's a shame that it never became a smash, because then it might have encouraged other people to go into that. But it did affect the whole technique of the Living Newspaper was the same thing that you use in Created Equal. The same dynamic kind of theater that ordinarily you would not do commercially. See, obviously, a medicine show could not succeed because it was too expensive. You can't have 50, 60, 80 actors on stage. Yet, why should we deprive the stage of the kind of pageantry that could exist if it was sponsored by the government, if it had that kind of a bankroll, so that we could do plays that would require that? Doesn't mean that you do it all the time.
No, but just
some plays
have
don't
the
demand
option.
it. But to have the option of doing a Coriolanus with a couple of hundred actors was really exciting. To do a living newspaper that utilized the talents of expert newspapermen using their research knowledge and turning it into material for the theater that they would never have thought of writing for or had the opportunity to write for. They're utilizing the technique of the voice and actors talking back to the voice, and utilizing a stage like One Third of a Nation. That was the most incredible set I ever saw in my life, with smoke pouring out of the tenement when there was a fire in 3 stories high, the kind of thing that Piscator and Reinhardt were doing in Germany, where they had subsidized theater. So that subsidized theater does enable you to go into areas that you are not able to go into ordinarily in a commercial theater.
What do you think about the quality of criticism of the federal theater plays in the 30s and perhaps the theater in general during the 30s?
I think it was legitimate, and I think that criticism, certainly of people like Brooks Atkinson and others, were very helpful in expanding this theater and giving it some strength. I think in the beginning they treated it, like a commercial thing. Mm-hmm. And then we said, yes, we have to compete in that level, but the level was determined not by pleasing the critics or matching the Broadway setup. In many cases, we did more than Broadway could ever do, you see. You didn't have the name stars at that time, for the federal theater, but you had something which proved that theater could exist without famous stars. Mm-hmm. That ballyhoo was not what theater was all about. Theater was a collective art. And when collectively you could bring together all of these fingers of the theater and have them work together, unknowns, all of them unknowns, you have this great hope for this country that under a national theater will reach out to the unknowns. Mm-hmm. The people who are looking for a chance to get into the theater, the people, the enormous talent all over this country that is trying to work and get into the theater, might have a chance under a federal theater or a national theater project.
So that it really didn't matter too much, or it didn't depend upon the critics.
On stars. It didn't depend on, as movies does, on stars. We found out that it depended on what were you communicating, the content. Mm-hmm. Look what it did. It did something we didn't talk about. It began to go into areas that made sense to unemployed, to people ridden with depression. So the contents of the play changed. Instead of the froth of Broadway or Ziegfeld Follies of 1922, or that kind of lightheaded stuff, or Noel Coward, who was a wonderful writer, but was not didn't write the theater for people that were going through unemployment, depression. It was the Odetses who began in the theater union and the group theater that began to spread out across this country with its messages of social content. The New Theater League. All of those brought their strength into the federal theater, their thinking, and then the audience demanded some material of content. Mm-hmm. And that result was not only the craziness of Horse Eats Hat of the Mercury Theater, but also going into the classical areas of Faustus and of Cradle the Rock, mm-hmm. which had content and mm-hmm. which began to worry the federal theater authorities. There was a case that we're talking of censorship. By sticking to bureaucratic rules, no, you could not do such and such on the stage, and you had to have a clearance of the scenery, and I forget what the federal theater cut out the funds for the theater we were going to do it in, but they were going to do it in. Whatever the reason, the point was that there was a fear that what we were doing, obviously, might shake up people, might make them think. And it did make them think of many.
Did that make people bitter? The idea that government sponsors a theater and then all of a sudden says, hey, that's not a good enough play, or it's too radical, or...
But look at what happened. It may have made them better. I have no way of knowing what happened to a collective group of people. But instead of accepting it, they walked through the streets of Broadway and found a house and did it sitting down. Yeah. In the audience. Yeah. They didn't get defeated by this kind of bureaucracy. Always there was an attempt, I suppose a lot of energy went into how to outwit the red tape, you see. But I'm sure that goes on all the time anyway. But we proved that it could be done, that you could have meaningful theater with deep content that was related to the people's lives, that it didn't have to be dilettantish or form any particular mold, and that people had a right to work in any area that they wanted to, to communicate on all these levels to the people of this country. And it was affected by their needs, the people's needs. That's a people's theater.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that we were, you want to say something, Sal?
That's it. Even today, they say, well, television is what the people want. It is not. It is what they want and force on, and people get used to have no alternative. When a good program with good content comes on, Missiles of October, for instance, wiped the ratings, wiped all the other programs out. It carried it. You give them, this was the thing the Federal Theater proved also, that people want to see about themselves.
Their problems.
That's right. Doesn't mean they can't see Shakespeare too, or
Comedy or musical. Nobody ever said. I don't even remember whether we had a musical comedy theater on the Federal Theater. I don't think so.
So you did do the Federal Theater.
The Federal Theater had a lot of musical plays.
Right.
Oh my God, we had symphony orchestras. We had wonderful. And suddenly found in the Federal Theater that their talents were needed. What a wonderful, wonderful thing that was.
You brought up an interesting point a little while ago about history. Can you explain the interest in historical subjects that the Federal Theater, the plays that the Federal Theater put on? There were plays on George Washington, on Lincoln, on John Brown, on John Henry. Was this typical, do you think, of the 30s, of people searching, or had this come before in the 20s and then carried through the 40s?
I think it began with the left-wing theater, with the theater of action, the social theater, looking into the roots of where we came from, and would naturally come out of his own research. Interested in folk drama and folk history. Don't forget, in those days, one of the things that the Federal Theater did, it had there was to the different states, and they dug into the history of our country. Then you have an enormous amount of material was needed to keep all these people at work, and there was a classical theater that would revive those plays. And there were the one-act play. They were going into an area where in one act, the writer could write things that were like hot off the griddle, so to speak. And I think that it came out of the needs of the times and of the hunger of people, of the artist into our background and our real background, and the questions that came out of questioning the system that had collapsed, you see.
But historically also in the 30s was the resurgence of an interest. I don't know whether it was a resurgence or whether it just happened, of interest in the folklore of the country. And remember, Tom Wolfe, of course, was writing about his people, and there were what we used to call down south the spit plays. The spit plays about the mountaineers. And the worst of them were, hey, Zeke, Tui, how's the weather, Tui, that sort of thing. It was an over-realism. But there were some very fine plays written about the people, the folks of this country, and black folks and the white folks, the country folk, the poor. And there was that resurgence of interest, and this was one of the Federal things.
In the black experience, the Negro theater, and the Negro writers, who had a great deal of knowledge of their own background, where up to that time they were so alienated from society. They were not part of society. Their image did not exist on the stage. Their image did not exist in history. Their image did not exist in the screen or on radio or in art. African dancing, you see, so that this image, this growth, this coming forth and able to express themselves and bring in the true history about Benjamin Banneker and about the black experience in the Civil War and Crispus Attucks and the role of blacks in suddenly these are all subjects of the material, the whole history of the black experience in America. I love was as progressive as I thought it was. But that deeply and still is being explored to this day by and who haven't ever near touched the enormous this country that is just beginning to come out. And it came out certainly during the Federal Theater. It was the beginning of that resurgence. Now, for the progressive writers and the progressive artists who demanded more research into our own history, in the folk history, as Sarah says, in jazz, in the African experience, and in the American experience, and way before country music and all that stuff that became popular here. They had to be integrated in your material. So I think that it began with the day-to-day activities of trade unions, the house, economic situation, power, the electric power situation, those were the living newspaper, took up the day-to-day topics. But take up a lot of interesting to relate to people. How can you go out in the park, even with a children's show, and just do the old fairy tales? Now you get 25,000 people watching Revolt of the Beavers or even The Emperor's New Clothes. The Emperor's New Clothes was a classic. It was about who tells the truth. Well, that was a universal theme. Revolt of the Beavers was a universal theme to some extent. Society was in revolt. People were asking questions. So why not? Why shouldn't the theater, dance, express all of those things? So you've got that tremendous need to go back in our history, find out the true revolutionary spirit.
That leads to another question.
That's my theory, anyway.
Oh, I think that's really interesting. That leads to another question, though, about some people have discounted the role of drama in the 30s and, say, the Federal Theater, perhaps because it's just been hidden for so long. But do you think of the Federal Theater as an American transitional period from, say, just the 20s to the 40s? Therefore, it doesn't stand up solely on it for its own merit. Or do you think the Federal Theater just can stand out by itself?
Well, I think the Federal Theater drew a tremendous strength, as I told you, from the New Theater, from the Group Theater, from the Theater Union, and because they were more geared for that period of history. And their leadership and their personnel that entered the theater had a tremendous effect on it. The Hallie Flanagans, who were open to every wave in the theater and in dance, interest in everything creative all over the world was tremendously valuable in permitting the project to go in those directions. So that the creation came, there was no such thing as being born anew without any relationship to the past. Its effect on the future, I think it had a great effect on the future. That it could stand by itself, sure. I mean, it could stand by itself, and you do all those plays over again and have 1 year of that material, and I think it would still be of interest to the people.
It was intensely, couldn't have happened in another country. Now, Eugene O'Neill's style of writing might have been done in another country. His subject matter is another thing. He might even have been an Englishman transplanted, lived here a long time, and began to see what he saw and written on those themes. But the forms and the content of the Federal Theater were intensely American. Absolutely.
And therefore, universal.
Yes,
Because they were so deeply rooted in the struggles of people.
Universal.
When you do something that is so uniquely American in experience, then you can identify with it.
Yeah.
It's not just whether the joke that goes in England will go in America or the joke in America will go in England is not the question, because sometimes plays that are done in England have no impact on us because it comes out of a different experience. And it's truthful for the England and it's not truthful for America. But in our case, I think we had a great deal to contribute, and we just started and then we were killed. When Bertolt Brecht or Piscata created the theater that they did in Berlin right after World War I, or whether in the Soviet Union they created the Vakhtanga